So how do you explain the age of Aisha radiallahu anha to a non-Muslim?
So the age of Aisha radiallahu anha. You know, when they make claims about the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, you should just say, so what? What's wrong with it? What's the matter with you? You can't just sit there and just absorb all of the attacks, the arrows, as if we are now being in a court case and they're the judge, jury, and executioner. With all due respect. And the issue for them, for the age of Aisha radiallahu anha, is one, a misunderstanding of Islamic legal or moral theory or reasoning, and it's also because of contemporary Western culture. And the way to deal with this is in the following way. Well, one thing is a lot of people cite history, which is a good additional argument, but it's not the core argument. And I don't like using it necessarily, because a lot of liberals or the people that we're talking to will basically say, oh, but times have changed, we're progressive, we disagree with that now. And it's not good to use that as a core argument, but it's good as a supporting argument. But nevertheless, just say to them a few things. When it comes to age of consent, or when it comes to the marriageable age and so on and so forth, we have a very robust moral and legal theory or reasoning. And we say the following. The first thing we have to understand is the usuli principle of there is no harming and no reciprocating of harm. This is a well-known principle in moral and legal reasoning in the Islamic tradition. So we would argue that there can't be any psychological and physical harm. The second moral and legal principle is urf, meaning social custom is determinative in fiqh. Is this clear? So think about these two moral principles or legal principles. Number one, there is no harming and no reciprocating of harm. And number two, urf is determinative in fiqh. So let's apply that situation to Aisha radiallahu anha. Based on those principles and based on the life of Aisha radiallahu anha, we know that there was no physical or psychological harm. The age is irrelevant. We're applying the principles here. We also know from an urfi perspective, her father, Abu Bakr radiallahu anh, said, take her. The society itself didn't even disagree with what was going on. So it's based on social custom as well. So what's the problem? These are timeless moral and legal principles. Maybe if you apply them in an orthodox Islamic context in today's society, we would basically say it will be blameworthy to marry a 9-year-old because the urf has changed, especially in Western cultures. And it may be argued because of social and biological aspects and the development of the human being, because the human being is not just biologically, it's not dictated by the essential biological features, but there's also a form of socialization. It could be the case because of our environments that there may be harm. We stand in that possibility. But if you understand the moral and legal reasoning of Islam and you apply it in that time and in this time, you're always going to get the right answer. But if you apply the secular principles, in New York, I believe, if you have the permission of your parents, you could get married at the age of 14. In some countries it's 12, other countries 21, other countries 18. You're inconsistent. I could technically get married in New York with the permission of the parents, I think if she's 14 or 12 or whatever the case may be. And then if I go to another state in America, I go to Europe, I become a pedophile. Inconsistent, incoherent. And it's simple as that. We have moral legal principles, and we say when you apply them, you get the right answer. And at the time of the Prophet ﷺ, and maybe other times too, if there's no physical or psychological harm, and the urf is basically facilitating this, and the way to assess that is obviously dealt with our fuqaha and our ulama. We're not going to discuss that right now. But if it's in line with the urf, then what's the problem? I remember the first time I took my wife to Hyde Park. It was the only time. You should never take your wife to Hyde Park. Hamza, she was wearing the niqab, she was with me, no one was, messing around. They would have got in big trouble. This was, I think, before Muhammad hijab overtook the scene. MashaAllah, tabarakallah, may Allah preserve him. Say Ameen. May Allah grant him and his family the best in this life and the best in life to come. Say Ameen. So, we were discussing something in the car, and then some white guy, dirty liberal, he didn't cut his nails, brush his teeth, he didn't wash his bum, one of those guys. At the end of the day, sometimes you have to psychologicalize it. How can you take seriously the philosophy of someone who doesn't wash his backside? You got crusty bum. Hey, Mr. Crusty Bum, why should I take you seriously? We need to civilize you. Let's be honest here, come on. Come on. Hey, so he says to her, your prophet married a 9-year-old, this, that, and the other. And she just turned back and said, so what age do you want her to be? His mouth was on the floor. His mouth was on the floor. He didn't know what to say because he knew any age that he gave would have been arbitrary and would have got him into a legal and moral mess. Islam, generally speaking, especially the Sharia, is not based on arbitrary numbers. There are some instances, but generally speaking, it's very principle-based. That's why it's timeless. You see this principle, there is no harm and no reciprocating of harm. And we have our own definitions and application of that, of course. And there is no, and urf is determinative in fiqh. The social custom in certain contexts is determinative in fiqh. When you apply that time, place, you're always going to get the right answer, and no one's going to be harmed, and everything's going to be fine. So in a London context, for example, if someone were to say to me, would you allow a 60-year-old or 50-year-old marry your 9-year-old daughter? I say no. It's immoral. Because of the Islamic principles. Because of urf, of the social custom. Because of maybe of harm as well in our particular context. Because of certain environmental factors that slow down the developmental process of certain issues. So it's not the age itself. That's arbitrary. We apply moral principles and we're proud of them. And it served us well and it served humanity well. They have the problem. But anyway, if you link this to the LGBTQ plus ideology, Gail Rubin, who wrote the essay that I mentioned in 1984, in the first 4 paragraphs, she's justifying basically pedophilia. They are blurring the lines of consent. Someone hasn't reached puberty and they are actually mutilating them and giving them puberty blockers. So on what moral ground do you have to say about this issue? With all due respect. Be consistent. And this is enshrined in your law, in your so-called rights. You're mutilating children or young people, and you're giving them medicines that's actually harming them. Do you see the point here? And they're blurring the lines of consent to the degree you have thinkers today and thinkers yesterday, Gail Rubin and others, that are now saying that having sex with minors is not a problem. They actually call this a form of discrimination. Because remember gender theory? Queer theory rather, based on the postmodern principles? We don't like categories. It includes age. It includes the kind of distinction between adult and child. That's a category based on a social construct. We want to disturb that. So it's okay for men to sleep with young boys, just like their prophet, Foucault, who raped Algerian boys in a graveyard. And you think you have the audacity to point the finger at us? You got 3 fingers pointing back. Do you see? I think that's a good answer, but if you go to history, it's kind of self-defeated. Many of these people came from marriages that were young. Many widows were the age of 18. Some of them married at the age of 9, 10, 11, and 12. And actually in law, it was allowed in Scotland, I believe, in the 1800s or late 1800s, to marry a 7-year-old, I believe. And some of these things happen. And they are the basically children of these people. It's a bit self-defeating to deny it, if you know what I mean. But that's a historical point. So hopefully that addresses the questions. Allah knows best.